Last week, Prime Minister Mark Carney met with Chinese President Xi Jinping in South Korea.
We agreed this meeting marked a turning point,
especially as U.S. President Donald Trump continues to wage his global trade war. China's foreign ministry announcing the government is allowing group tours to Canada again, saying it will further people-to-people exchanges.
After years of diplomatic chill and lost opportunity, a quiet but monumental shift is underway. China has officially reinstated Canada on its list of approved travel destinations for group tours, a move that signals more than just the return of tourists. It marks a thaw in one of the most strained relationships of the past decade, and it comes at a time when global trade politics are once again defined by confrontation from Washington. As President Donald Trump escalates tariffs and trade wars, Canada, under Prime Minister Mark Carney, is charting a different path, one rooted in diplomacy, diversification, and quiet strategic rebuilding. 这周, Beijing's Ministry of Culture and Tourism confirmed that Chinese group travel to Canada can officially resume. It's a decision that carries heavy symbolism. Chinese tourists were once a cornerstone of Canada's tourism economy, making up roughly 60% of many agencies' bookings before relations froze in 2018. That collapse began after the arrest of Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou in Vancouver on a U.S. extradition request, an event that triggered China's detention of Canadians Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, leading to a diplomatic ice age. Even when China began reopening to global tourism in 2023, Canada remained excluded from its approved list, a pointed snub that cost the Canadian tourism sector millions. Now, that exclusion is over. The announcement followed a series of diplomatic gestures. Foreign Minister Melanie Joly's visit to Beijing and, most notably, Prime Minister Mark Carney's 40-minute bilateral meeting with Xi Jinping at the APEC summit in South Korea, where both leaders described their talks as a turning point. For the first time in years, Ottawa and Beijing are speaking the same diplomatic language, reconnection through pragmatism. This reopening isn't just about tourism. It's about trust and about a new kind of geopolitical realism. For Canada, the timing is deliberate. Under the Carney government, Ottawa has been pivoting toward Asia, signing new defense and economic partnerships with South Korea and engaging ASEAN in free trade negotiations. Re-establishing functional ties with China is a logical next step, especially as Trump's America First agenda continues to disrupt global trade stability. China, too, has its motives. With Donald Trump re-elected and waging tariff battles against nearly every major economy, including China, Canada, and the EU, Beijing sees value in easing tensions with secondary Western partners. Reopening tourism to Canada sends a message. China is willing to reward cooperation and dialogue over confrontation. Beyond symbolism, this marks a test of how far Carney's independent foreign policy can stretch before it collides with Washington's expectations. Ottawa knows that the U.S. will watch this development closely, especially as Trump pushes for a tougher North American alignment against China ahead of the 2026 USMCA review. Yet Carney's strategy is rooted in long-term calculation, not provocation. By engaging Beijing through tourism, education, and clean tech cooperation rather than direct trade deals, he's building a soft bridge that strengthens Canada's economic leverage without triggering American retaliation. It's a subtle but high-stakes balancing act, one that defines Canada's new role in the post-Trump global order. Mark Carney's approach is notably cautious, what his advisors call measured engagement. He isn't seeking a full reset or romantic revival of the pre-2018 relationship. Instead, Carney's goal is to stabilize economic channels, reopen people-to-people ties, and avoid overdependence on the United States. Analysts say this is classic Carney, a former central banker applying steady, data-driven logic to diplomacy. His message, delivered quietly but firmly at APEC, was simple. Canada will engage where it benefits Canadians, regardless of Washington's political mood. By framing China as a partner in selective cooperation, not an adversary, but not an ally either, Carney is redefining Canada's global position: independent, pragmatic, and open-eyed. Meanwhile, south of the border, the contrast couldn't be sharper. President Trump's second-term trade crusade has triggered economic whiplash, tariffs up to 100%, supply chains in chaos, and inflation eating into consumer confidence. Trump's hardline stance on China, combined with 25% tariffs on Canadian goods, has pushed Ottawa to seek alternatives. Ironically, the more Washington pressures its allies, the more those allies look elsewhere. The reopening of Chinese tourism to Canada, right after Carney's meeting with Xi, is a symbolic rejection of Trump's isolationism. It suggests that U.S. influence, once absolute in shaping Canada's foreign relations, is no longer the only game in town. In short, Trump's economic wall is pushing neighbors to build new doors. The immediate impact will be felt across Canada's tourism and retail sectors. Before the freeze, Chinese visitors were the world's biggest spenders per capita, staying longer, traveling farther, and spending more than tourists from any other country. Their return could inject hundreds of millions into local economies, from Vancouver to Banff to Toronto. But the broader significance is strategic. Every flight landing from Beijing or Shanghai represents not just economic recovery, but a restoration of trust. Ottawa officials describe this as people-first diplomacy, the idea that cultural and economic connections can thaw what politics froze. This moment fits a larger pattern unfolding across the Asia-Pacific. While Trump strengthens military trade blocs with Japan, South Korea, and Australia, Canada is quietly building bridges in parallel, engaging China, deepening ASEAN ties, and promoting its Trade Diversification 2035 strategy to double non-U.S. exports. In effect, Carney is crafting a new Canadian doctrine, one that accepts the world as it is, fragmented, competitive, multipolar, and seeks to navigate it with economic intelligence instead of ideological loyalty. For Beijing, welcoming Canadian tourists again is a low-cost, high-impact gesture that buys goodwill and signals normalcy. For Ottawa, it's a small but crucial proof that its Asian pivot is working. For years, the Canada-China relationship was frozen in mistrust, collateral damage from great power rivalry. But this week's announcement, modest as it seems, may mark the first real thaw. As Chinese tourists prepare to once again walk through Banff's mountain trails or Niagara's mist, Canada is walking its own path, one that leads away from dependency toward balance. Prime Minister Carney calls it a new era of strategic openness. The world may soon call it something else, the moment Canada quietly came of age as an independent global actor.
Trade negotiations between Prime Minister Mark Carney and U.S. President Donald Trump left many investors disappointed as Canada remains the only G7 country without a trade deal with the United States. This puts Canada in a precarious position and suggests the country may need to move away from the trilateral CUSMA agreement and instead deepen its trade ties with Mexico.
What if the two neighbors America depends on most, Canada and Mexico, decided to depend on each other instead? Across North America, trade lines are being redrawn. What began as Donald Trump's attempt to dominate the continent through tariffs is now shifting power in unexpected ways. His effort to force manufacturing back to American soil has pushed Canada and Mexico to look toward one another. For decades, Washington stood at the center of North America's supply chains, but Trump's wave of import duties and industrial credits has fractured that system. What was meant to bring control has instead created a new corridor of power stretching from Montreal to Mexico City, two nations learning to work without Washington's approval. The White House's goal was clear. Trump wanted to break apart the trilateral structure of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or CUSMA, and replace it with one-on-one deals that gave the U.S. maximum leverage. Instead, the pressure has done the opposite. It has pulled Canada and Mexico into closer alignment. After months of tariff battles, steel, autos, heavy trucks, and aluminum, the United States now faces the slow isolation of its own supply network. Factories that once depended on seamless cross-border production are now dealing with paperwork, higher costs, and shrinking margins. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce warned in early October that prolonged tariffs risk higher inflation and supply bottlenecks, while the World Trade Organization cautioned that the trade war could cut global GDP growth by more than half a percentage point if it continues into 2026. Rather than fight for individual deals with Washington, Ottawa and Mexico City have begun coordinating policy and investment. Trump's divide-and-conquer approach has become the trigger for regional cooperation. What was once a three-way partnership centered on the U.S. is now splitting into two: Canada and Mexico on one side, Washington on the other. On September 17, 2025, Prime Minister Mark Carney and Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum signed a strategic partnership and a Canada-Mexico Action Plan 2025-2028. The announcement came as Trump prepared new 25% tariffs on heavy trucks effective November 1. The plan deepens cooperation in agriculture, healthcare, energy, and infrastructure, while keeping trade between Canada and Mexico tariff-free. Canada will send its agriculture minister to Mexico next month, followed by a trade mission led by Minister Dominic LeBlanc. Both governments will also expand security coordination against gun smuggling, drug trafficking, and fentanyl. Ironically, fentanyl was one of Trump's main justifications for his own tariff policy. Carney called this a new era of cooperation, a sign that Canada and Mexico are building reliability in a world where the U.S. is no longer predictable. According to Statistics Canada, about 75% of Canada's exports in 2024 went to the United States. That dependence leaves Ottawa exposed each time Washington changes its rules. Partnership with Mexico offers a safety valve. It connects Canada to lower-cost labor, diversified logistics through Pacific and Atlantic ports, and a new route into Latin America and Asia via the CPTPP. Mexico gains from Canadian capital and advanced manufacturing expertise. J.P. Morgan analysts estimate that redirecting even 5 to 10% of exports from the U.S. to Mexico could stabilize Canadian manufacturing during trade disruptions. The corridor isn't an act of protest, it's a way to survive the volatility of Trump's tariff era.
This realignment began early in 2025 when the Trump administration imposed new import duties under Section 232, citing national security. The move added a 25% tariff on heavy trucks and 35% on key auto components. In April, Stellantis shifted Jeep Compass production from Brampton, Ontario to Illinois, a $13 billion investment that created 5,000 U.S. jobs but cut 3,000 in Canada. It was a symbolic victory for Trump's reshoring agenda and a shock for Ontario's manufacturing belt. By mid-year, Canada was the only G7 nation without a trade deal with Washington. Investors reacted. The Canadian dollar fell to a 3-year low, and unemployment rose to 7.1%, according to Statistics Canada's September data. Instead of retaliating, Carney held back. Ottawa skipped counter tariffs and turned its focus south, to Mexico. That decision now defines Canada's new playbook: build strength through cooperation, not confrontation. What started as a tariff war has turned into a regional reset. Trump's economic walls were meant to protect American jobs, but they've redirected trade around them. Canada and Mexico are quietly building an economic corridor linking industries, ports, and supply chains, an alliance that could lessen Washington's gravitational pull on the continent. With the 2026 CUSMA review approaching, the two partners are already aligned for whatever comes next. For now, one fact stands out. When Trump tried to split North America, he didn't just fracture trade lines, he created a new one, a line that runs not through the United States, but around it.